Yeah, and Chair, please, you can begin your round.
All right, thank you. And just before we just begin, finally, opening government. Okay, I don't think it's important. So I'll just read the motions. Once I read the motion, Prime Minister, you may begin your speech. So the motion for this semi-final reads, BookScan is a data provider for the book publishing industry, whereby book publishers check the profitability of an author based on the sales history and popularity of their previous works. BookScan numbers are like an author's credit rating. This house supports BookScan. Prime Minister, you may begin the speech now. Here.
All right. Am I audible?
Here.
All right. Please give me a moment to set up my timer. Okay. Am I still audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay, I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Panel, it's when we talk itself, the ratings will not just come from every Tom, Dick, and Harry. It won't just come from anybody, but it will come from verified statistics from maybe libraries or book houses that deals with the sales of book. Maybe Amazon Book, Book and Bands, is it Author and Bands or something? All those sites that basically have to do with the sales of book and the authorization of book in itself. Those are the best place to get stats from. So we think it's not just something where someone comes and just give a review online and then we say we are rating that. This is to take out any form of argumentation on opposition to say, oh, but books can be subjective and any other to say, oh, rather anybody can come and give things based on their biases. We think it comes from verified books houses. I think that takes care of that. Under framing, it's also important for us to recognize the main purpose of publishers in themselves. And we think the number one purpose of publishers is to find authors and manuscripts. That means at the end of the day, they have a job to do, and that job is profit incentivized in the first place. They are not there for charity. They are not there to help people add their views. They are there to find people who already have views, who is enough to meet the standard that exists within society or their own particular standards of publishers, and then make sure that they find those particular people and they produce it. It also means that authors are not there for charity, because authors most of the time also look for good publishing houses that will be able to carry out what they want, or that will be able to promote their book in the way they want. We think at the end of the day, the impact of this framing is to say that this engages in the context of capitalism in itself, where the publishers are looking for profit and the authors also are looking for profit. So it now boils down to how best do we make sure that both ends make profit at the end of the day. We think that apart from also finding authors and manuscripts, they also find manuscripts that are marketable. They also go as far as designing or editing this manuscript to make it something that will be acceptable within society for their authors to be able to make enough profit at the end of the day. They also market them. I think this is enough justification to prove why at the end of the day everything here is capitalistic. The importance of all this is to the extent where they cater for their author's progress, to the extent where they have that, to the extent where they cater for their author's progress, to the extent where they also help to promote the popularity of their author. They also help to give quality service towards consumers, because the sales are determined by the work of these authors, and also the self-credibility or the social capital of those particular authors rely on them. We think those are a lot of responsibility that these publishers have, even as capitalists, that they have to cater for, and they can only cater for it through this BookScan in itself. Yes, what is your point of clarification?
How exactly does supporting books can look like? Kindly give us a frame on that.
Okay, yes. How supporting looks like essentially. Supporting looks basically like for every publishing house or for every publisher to accept a particular writer's work or author's work, they make sure that they've received a credible rating from these particular people before they can move on to work with them. It also means like something like Writers Guild, make sure that they have maybe a way, an app or any mechanism of making sure that they have all these particular type of ratings. So at the end of the day, they're able to review it. So it looks more like before you get a publisher, these are documents you have to verify even before you look at the person's work at the end of the day, and before you even make the decision that you're going to represent these people as their publisher at the end of the day. We think that also in continuance to my case, there's also the case on what is the interest of the author. The interest of the author is one, they want their work to be appreciated, but they also want to get buy-in. These are also profits that they want to make at the end of the day. We think the reason why the author telling you that their book is good and you believing them is not enough is because the author don't have an oversight of how the market works. It is the duty of the publisher, as to how I've told you, the particular responsibility that lies on the publisher. It is the duty of the publisher to know the ratings of their of these authors and to know how these people already fare in the market. So we think at the end of the day, it is important for them to do this, if to support this, if at the end of the day they want to favor the authors at the end of the day. Moving on, we think the idea of BookScan profits the publisher's interest and the author's interest. How? It affects the author publisher's interest because it gives publishers or publishing houses reasons to control their resources and control allocation that they use, because this is a form of investment for them themselves. They need to know that what they're investing into is something that will not drain their resources in the first place. But we think that even if these people have low rating and we say, oh, these particular people at the end of the day, and the publishers still take them up, we think there'll be no backlash when one, these particular books don't sell, so they cannot sue the author and say, oh, you did something bad. The authors can also sue them because you know that these people took you up even when you had a low rating. We think both ends are protected at the end of the day. But we also think that moving forward, how it affects the authors is it gives authors a reason to critique how they can get better. So you know that you're having a low rating, for you to get high ratings, and not just also get high ratings, for you to also get a publisher, you have to get better with maybe your skills of writing and a lot of that. Because in status quo, we have situations where a lot of published books around with nobody at the end of the day to buy those books at the end of essentially. We also think that even if we say, oh, low ratings won't get to publishers, we think at the end of the day, there are other publishing houses with different standards that exist for people to opt into. There are other publishing houses that might choose to accept people with low rating. We think these are things that can exist. There are also publishing houses that at the end of the day might choose to exist solely for charity in cases where they think that the society is too polarized with high standards or high rating in itself. We think at the end of the day, in our world, we're able to show how publishing houses will still be able to mitigate wastage of resources and mitigate wastage of time that they use to invest in people's world. But we also think that it also saves author from the stress of being mediocre, and they get better. It also means for those who self-publish, they can also be able to analyze their rating and how well they can do good. You get more from my partner.
Yes, you are. We thank the Prime Minister for that fine speech and welcome the Leader of Opposition to begin their case.
Am I audible, please? Okay, so for the sake of POIs, just indicating the text space. Yeah, I'll try to take one. I'll certainly be prioritizing one from closing government for the sake of the short diagonal engagement. With that said, just give me a few seconds to arrange my sheets. Okay, so beginning in 3, 2, 1. So panel the house. The very first thing that you need to note as it regards to a support motion is that if you are saying that you support something, you have to effectively show how, one, the kind of benefits that that particular stuff gives is something that is intrinsically exclusive to that particular stuff. Understand that all of the benefits that opening government gives are things that are symmetric to what you get in our world, even like, without, or in the world without, like, BookScan. Without BookScan, authors still have an incentive, a very huge incentive, by the way, like a very, very big one, not to be mediocre, because by and large, they want to make it within the purview of society. But beyond that, they generally do not even want, they generally want to still do things like get good sales and the rest of that, like even moving forward. But secondly, understand how the whole idea of profits and the rest of that is not something that is still lost in our world. Like it's still something that profit is something that you had before the existence of BookScan. It's something that, like, you would continuously have even within the purview of our world. It's not as though like their world improves profits like in any way. But understand the metric on which you generally do not support this particular stuff. On the first level, you decide not to support something in instances where that particular thing is principally bad. That is to say, in instances where that particular thing is principally bad, it becomes justified for you not to support it. But two, when the kind of outcomes that that particular thing effectively gives is one that is primarily bad, what I'll simply do for you is effectively show you how, like, BookScan in itself is one that generally goes against like general principles. But secondly, how comes the outcomes on the level of pragmatics is something that is bad. On the first level, we think that the impact that this particular stuff in itself has on upcoming authors is one that is primarily bad. The reason for this is because we think that with the whole existence of BookScans, we make it less likely for upcoming authors within the purview of society to be able to get, like, things like publishing within the purview of society. Understand how you greatly reduce their odds within the purview of government's world. The reason why this in itself is something that is true is particularly because of the whole idea of those ratings that exist. What it means is that it's almost certain that new upcoming authors will not necessarily have those flashy ratings and the rest of them, meaning they are now less likely to want to get, like, to be able to get this particular level of publishing in society. Why is this different from status quo? Why is it different? Well, why is it different from a world without BookScan? The reason why it's different from a world without BookScan, where all of these particular ratings do not exist, is because authors, or because publishers, are now more likely to want to give new authors a chance within our world. Why? Because they're not necessarily sure of the star rating of this particular, or they not necessarily have any star rating that they want to start, like, weighing this particular person bad. So they are more likely to want to, like, they're more likely to want to take a chance on people, as opposed to a world where they are very, very sure, like, they're very, very sure that, okay, this particular person has a poor star rating, or does not even have any star rating, like, moving forward. We think that this this particular clash is one that is very, very important as it relates to how comes their word in itself negatively impacts upcoming authors. But beyond that, we think on the level of principle again, their word is one that is akin to slavery. Why? Because it prevents things like interrogation of social discourse. Because you need to understand how these particular BookScans in themselves work, like, moving forward. Understand how they are ratings, but primarily ratings in themselves are usually pushed by people in themselves that are the majority within the purview of society. What it means is that authors in themselves that necessarily write social change books, let's say writers for social movements, we're talking about writers of the likes of Chinonso Achebe that wrote, like, a book like, there was a country, and the rest of that, are less likely to be able to get, like, good star ratings within the purview of this particular society. The reason for this is because what they are writing is against, like, or what they are writing is not in line with what majority of people in themselves, like, might necessarily key into within the purview of society, because they are writing, like, for social change. The reason why this in itself is bad is because this particular BookScan rating, which is existent, generally prevents these particular books in themselves from ever being able to come to the limelight, meaning in a way it's now a form of slavery. Why? Because now entrenched on people's, like, poetic license on the first level, because now, like, force people literally to continuously write things that are in line with just societal narrative, and not necessarily things that, like, they want to, like, that they might want to say to express themselves, particularly in instances where they are in minority groups and particularly want to, like, cause change with their writing. You force them in a way with the existence of this particular BookScan with their ratings to effectively not be able to do so. But secondly, is that you even entrench, like, you further entrench these particular guys in the sense that you even prevent their books from being able to see limelight at the end of the day. The alternative, and this would be the only rebuttal that, like, government can give to this particular idea, is to say, oh, these guys can go for publishing houses that might not necessarily care about this particular rating. But understand how this particular publishing houses would most likely be very minute or very small, like, publishing houses that do not necessarily have the reach to be able to, like, infiltrate spaces that these books themselves need to infiltrate for them to have any real form of utility. Meaning, at best, you are not able, even in the best case scenario of ops, where these guys go to cheap publishing houses, they're not still able to get the level of traction that they want. They're not able to get the level of popularity that they want. In the long run, impact of this now looks like a further entrenchment of classism, where the only books that you now allow to exist within the paradigm of society now becomes only book, like, for majority authors. We think that in itself is one that is basically bad on the level of principle, but even on the level of impact as it relates to lack of a feasible space for discourse and lack of, like, creation of a space for change within the purview of status quo. We think that in itself is something that's particularly bad. But then why is status quo totally different, like, from their world? Or why is status quo, like, different from the world that are trying to push? Because status quo is our counterfactual, basically, or rather a status quo without book space, rather, is our counterfactual, basically, that we're trying to, like, support. But before that, I'll take any POIs. Okay, Oji.
So do you accept that whether inferior publishing house or mainstream publishing house, these guys are actually there for profit? Yes or no?
As I pointed out earlier on before, profit in itself is not necessarily something that is exclusive to any world. Before BookScan, people make profit. After BookScan, people keep on making profit. But also understand how, like, the fact that a book goes against, like, societal narrative does not necessarily mean that people will not buy it. And this is why my interrogation of what status quo in themselves, like what status quo in itself, like, looks like. Status quo looks like a world where these particular publishers are not necessarily sure of, or do not necessarily have any star rating like you have within the purview of book space. What it means is that they are now more likely understand on the impact of on the argument of probability. They are now more likely to give these particular guys a chance. This in itself is something that is very, very key, because it then means that all of the positive impacts that I mentioned is now more possible or now more probable to happen in our world. But then it means that all of the negative impacts are now more likely to happen within the purview of our world, of their own world, rather. To the extent where these guys in themselves are now more likely to give these guys a chance, it then looks like things like books by Chinua Achebe or other authors in themselves from minority movements or from social movements in themselves now being able to come to light, to be able to cause the kind of change that, like, the kind of change that is necessary or that they wanted to cause within the purview of society. At the end of the day, panel, understand how profit in itself is something that you get on both sides of the divide, because people will certainly buy these books, like, moving forward. It's not as though the books are just trash books. It's not as though the publishers will not still, like, go through these particular books and to go through these particular books and the rest of that. At the end of the panel, this debate cannot just be judged on profit. Profit is something that exists on both sides. It should be judged rather on clashes, one, on principle, but two, on pragmatics. In what world does it generally make sense? Is it a world that favors, is it a world that people within species? Yeah.
Yes, you are. We thank the leader of opposition for that fine speech. Welcome the DPM to extend the opening government case. Hey.
Okay, so am I audible?
Yes, you are.
All right, thank you. So I don't know what the time stamp looks like. If by my 5th minute, you can just notify in text space for the speakers to unmute and ask me POI. I really, really appreciate that, panel. So yeah, just maybe on my 5th minute, just put it in text space, like 5 minutes, and so teams can see that and then unmute and ask me POI. Oh, beautiful. Thank you very much, Chair. So yeah, so guys, that's it. Closing opposition, you can unmute at that 5th minute ask. If you don't have opening opposition, can as well do that. So coming, just give me like let's say 10 seconds to gather my thoughts. Okay, so I'm starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. A simple thought experiment panel. The reason why this tournament has something like feedback form that allows speakers to allot point and rating for judges, like we have 5 judges on this panel, is because at the end of the day, the CAP need that particular rating to determine the person that is going to be the best judge, the second best judge, the third best judge.
Just pause your time. Okay, you can continue your speech now. Thank you.
Okay, cool. I'll just continue now. Apart from the fact that this particular ratings allows for the confidentiality of speakers and teams in the pool of judges we have in this particular tournament, it naturally allows us to understand the new breeds of qualities of judges that exist in the debate circuit. This comparative and this simple thought experiment try to establish 2 things. 1, we think that the idea of objective ratings naturally exists in all society for people to understand the quality of people in themselves. You naturally need number. At the end of this debate, what I'm going to be showing you in my speech are 3 things. 1, I will engage the worst case scenario that could ever happen in our own side of the house. And then I'll engage best case in opposition side to win this debate. Let's end the worst case scenario because we didn't even get it from OO, but let me help them. The worst case scenario that would ever happen, government and the big concession I'm making is that, there's going to be a falsification of data, and that naturally is being used as a weaponized to deter this actualization of some of this inclusivity within these particular spaces for these particular people. Why is that true? We think that different authors in themselves have different targeted audience for themselves. That is why the comparative in open opposition cannot work. But then let's engage even if it works. Chinonso writing for Igbo, or probably trying to project the marginalization of people within the East or within the South, does not naturally mean that we expect people from the West to buy that kind of market. Naturally, publishing house already understand the limited scope of the targeted audience. So what we only do through BookScan is to see how people from the East or people from the South were able to have wide buyings towards Chinonso-based material within that particular community in itself. Meaning that on our side of the house, we are still able to cater for the peculiarity and the diversity that exists in consumer rights and choice that naturally still protect the self-actualization of these particular authors in themselves. These 2 worst case scenario, which is the harms that exist with BookScan, is like something that naturally takes everything from opening opposition out. Let's engage another comparative in this debate, which is something that will make opening government to take this round, right? We think that the interest of every author in itself, whether or not they want to make profit or they don't want to make profit, is for them to remain relevant within the publishing business in itself. And that is true. Why? Because their self-actualization is something that is mostly contingent on the expertise and the prominence of this particular publishing house. And opening opposition concede with this when they say, they don't want these particular people to go to inferior publishing house because those particular sort of publishing house in themselves do not have the social capital to project them. The problem with that concession means that they agree that the self-actualization of these particular authors in themselves is vastly tied to the proficiency and the efficiency of this particular publishing out. Meaning, if you necessarily want quality, then you also have to be qualitative. You also have to be qualitative enough. The best case scenario in our side of the house is that 1, this particular publishing house get to understand that this author in themselves have low rating, and then you reject them. The weaponization of that particular rejection means that this author in themselves are able to retweak their artistry and then understand how this particular market works, or probably just get another career. We don't even necessarily care about that if that's the burden that opposition wants us to defend. But let's just stick within the scope of using that to necessarily better themselves. But then if this particular publishing house do not necessarily reject them, why do we think it is better? Notice in status quo, the reason why most authors in themselves are mostly vilified by publishing house in themselves is because of the projections that most of these particular people have towards them, that these guys are going to be marketable. We think that the realization of what naturally exists in progression of time is why most of these publishing houses always underpay these particular authors in themselves. At a point where you understand that these particular people have low rating and then you still choose to take them in, what it means is two things. One, that you are ready to pull in resources to retweak these particular people to be better in themselves, which is like a concentration, concentrated attention to making these particular authors in themselves to be better within that particular market. Why? Because that naturally means that this publishing house naturally owns them, so they want to take care of them. But on the biggest engagement of how it deters, like futuristic authors in themselves, like life is always premised on the principle of race. The race is always to the strongest. At a point where you say, let us kill these mechanisms because it does not allow for every other person's actualization. It also means that you don't preemptively create a possibility for these particular people to understand the futuristic arms and the expectations that this particular society in themselves need and want from them. So in our own side of the house, we're able to even incentivize this futuristic author to be better preemptively and even break the glass ceiling against the existing and the old authors that are already making stars in our own side of the house. We take this debate because we show you in the best case scenario that happens in our own side of the house and the worst case scenario that happens in the opposition side of the house, why BookScan in itself is principally consistent with what is in the best interest of the market, what is in the best interest of the author, and what is in the best interest of the publishing house. I see you in finals.
We thank the Deputy Prime Minister for ending the opening government's case. Welcome the DLO to wrap up the opening house debate.
Can I be heard?
Yes, you are audible.
Okay, sorry, let me just get something out. Everyone, so the POIs will be exclusively in the text space. Don't unmute within the speech. I get easily disorganized. Secondly, there is no preferred gender pronouns for me. Anything is cool and all those sort of things and everything. Yeah, so I will start in 3, 2, 1. Panel, I think that this is basically a support motion. It means basically if you want to introduce any new mechanism if you want to introduce any new mechanism to the society or to a commercial enterprise, you have to show the exclusive or the added level of benefit that would intrinsically bring to both the consumers and to both the writers in themselves. Notice that their own side of the house does not bring any new added impact to the consumers. Why? Because to the extent where famous writers can still publish in the counterfactual that we have provided in status quo, it means there is no added benefit within that particular regard, right? But then secondly, it means that the publishers do not get any new added stuff. The reason for this is simple, because they will still inherently get that same benefit from famous writers, even whether they have a BookScan or whether they do not have a BookScan within that particular regard. What does this exclusively tell you from our own side? This is something that Ebube clearly points out within the first 1 minute of his speech. It means that all the benefits on their own side is something that can still be obtainable on our own side. It means then it makes more sense to now start talking about where more harms exist on both sides of the house. And this has been the entire point of the 7 minutes, 15 seconds of Ebube's speech. But let's extend this debate further, and I would engage like PM and DPM. Notice that the ability of a writer to be popular and get ratings is dependent on the ability to write things that conform to certain societal rhetorics and all. It means that liberal society are less likely to rate conservative writers and all those kinds of charts. It means then that this BookScan limits the sustenance of views that are in some way considered not acceptable within a particular society. Government can say that there are other ways to propagate views, be it the social media and all those kinds of things. The reason why that rebuttal will fall flat to this particular argumentation is that books in themselves are repositories of information and are more permanent than other means of passing information. It means on their own side of the house that to retain views would be only for the temporal point in time. On our own side of the house, we are better able to retain societal views that may not be considered like popular permanently within that particular point in time. But secondly, notice that they invalidate the entire framework of capitalism because that is the entire bedrock of their case. If I can show you a way how they invalidate capitalism, we obviously take it above them. Notice that the entire OG speech, right, is premised on capitalism. But notice that capitalism is a free market model that allows the sustainability of products that are both famous and products that are not famous to penetrate spaces. It means that when you say that we should only allow like star ratings books and all those kinds of things, you no longer allow for smaller books or books that are not popular to penetrate spaces within this particular regard. This is principally against the entire bedrock of which capitalism is built on this point in time. On our own side of the house, our word allows the general dissemination of works, be it popular and be it unpopular, but also allows people who do not have the access to capital to buy famous books within this particular regard. Why is this true and why is it important? Notice that famous writers are more likely to place their books at exorbitant prices. It means that in the vast majority of instances, that people that do not have much access to capital and have not like fended for themselves in terms of food and shelter are less likely to buy books. It means then that they reduce like literacy and the reading culture within society. That is a pragmatic harm on individuals within this particular regard. But let's extend what Abidatu tells you further. He talks about artistic license. Notice that the artistic license of authors is intrinsically important to the survival of literature of all forms within society. Notice that people possess creativity, but due to things like societal limitations or previous failures, right, their word limits the continuous sustenance of writers who have either failed in the past or comparatively are new within writing. This is principally wrong on two levels. Given that on their own side of the house, they limit like the intrinsic ability of people to express their creativity in all forms. But secondly, they limit the artistic freedom that is important for societal progression. Notice that books within this particular regard are important for holistic development of a society. They reduce that. They tell you, there is this funny thing that DSM says. DSM tells you that these people can go to other fields, right? The problem with this particular thing, with this particular assertion are two things. It means that when famous writers die or they stop writing, there will no longer be a younger generation to continue to propagate artistic license and artistic freedom that is important for a society to survive. This is pragmatically wrong on all fronts. But let's talk about, there is this disingenuous thing that this DSM says. The worst case scenario is that this will fail. We'll give you the caveat. We'll assume that the technology would be good and all those kinds of things. Notice something, that publishers on their own side don't just limit authors. They limit and decide what people read within society. The impact is that they reject books that don't meet this metric and force writers to write along specific lines. The impact of this is just beyond the poetic license. The impact is that it prevents the growth of art. Notice that for art to grow, there must be incentive for content to go against societal norm. There must be incentive that you should allow all forms of art, right? It means that, okay, I'll take you later, please. I said don't unmute, please. It means that when you don't allow like arts that do not conform to certain societal norms, you disincentivize growth. But notice that artistic like progression on their own side of the house would be more likely be statistic because it would only be just about famous writers and the kinds of books that they write within that particular regard. Shoot your POI, OG.
Yeah, so we think your word is symmetric, right? So because if there's popularity in your word, right, it means that people are more likely going to write on basis of popularity. But I think in our word, that ranking shows what necessarily is saying. Like, so we think that all those things you're talking about are inherently symmetric.
Okay, I think that the problem is that you fail to recognize invariably what you propose. Because notice that even if the benefits of being famous is symmetric on our own side, the benefits of not being famous cannot be found on your own side. You limit people comparatively more. We have already shown you how in the vast majority of instances, if people don't write according to things that are conform to societal norms, books like books that spoke against imperialism when whites were still in control of Africa is something that would most likely not be in existence, right? It means on your own side that you try to provide like continuous levels of benefits, but it is only symmetric for famous writers. It does not extend to people that are like not famous and all those kinds of stuff. We have already shown you on terms of principles how we clearly win this debate. But then secondly, we have shown you how the counterfactual includes every person and not a classist mechanism within this particular regard. But thirdly, we have shown you how for you to have a continuous societal progression, it is important for you to allow all sorts of books within society. We have never been prouder to come from UU.
We thank the Deputy Leader of Opposition for ending the opening halves debate. Welcome the Member of Government to begin the closing halves debate. Here.
Am I audible, please?
Yes,
Hello.
you are.
All right. Give me a moment to get my sheets in order and I'll start soon. Okay, so I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. So, panel, we think that there has been like very, very underutilization of like within today's debate, right? What I'm going to do from GAF side is to show you how necessarily our world fixes the problems that inherently exist within the publishing industry, one, but then also how necessarily we are going to be able to position authors in like authors and publishing houses in the industry better in the digital age, and how our world solves the entire problems that we get from like opening opposition, right? So before I move on to my substantive engagements to open opposition. So open opposition's like biggest problem is the fact that new authors are not able to come up, right? And then like things like popularity and who is on top like is going to reign, right? So why we think that is symmetric? Because the comparative is that in status quo, right, you have a world where authors are going to necessarily sell based on the idea that they were famous or that they were once famous, right? Why is that bad? Because it gives them an ability to be able to ride on that popularity, that famousness, and whatsoever, whether they are going old and whatnot, right? To constantly sell books and constantly get to publishing houses, right? But then new authors will still have to grapple with the fact that they are not known. They don't have information as to where they can sell their books and whatnot, right? We think that our world better provides a metric for them to be able to solve that fight. Because if they come to the realization that their books are inherently failing, right, means that they do more to be able to push that narrative, right? We don't think that when people come to the idea or realization that they want to write books, right, they do not necessarily forcibly always want to incline to what mainstream does, right? To think that there are instances where disruptors and innovators come up, right? But then, why our word is better is because it gives these guys a fair idea and a fair chance to be able to understand where their book sells, why their book sells, and why people will necessarily buy their books, right? That's better than the idea that will constantly exist on the other side where you only sell books because you're popular, right? These guys should have shown us an incentive on publishing agencies to be able to pick up like new artists, right? Once these guys didn't show the incentive and have already considered the fact that these publishing houses are inherently profit incentive, it means that there's literally no incentive for them to also decide to go for new artists and necessarily, right? These guys fail to show that incentive, saying that they're out of today's debate, right? And then, relax. So in extensions and why we are different from our opening, right? So we are going to show you necessarily how authors are paid and how necessarily our word is one that solves the kind of marginalization that exists within the publishing industry, right? So authors necessarily are paid from things like royalties, right? From their books, like their book selling and whatnot, right? The reason why this is important is because the kind of tracking that is done traditionally is things like ISBN numbers, which are mainly owned and which are mainly managed by publishing industries at large. It means that publishing industries now have the ability to be able to control, like to determine what number of books you sold as an author, and then determine the kind of royalties you get as an author. Why that is bad and why award is better? Because what award does is that it makes this information open to everyone. That tracking those ISBN numbers open to authors themselves. So authors who have been told that by publishing houses that they've sold 780 books can go on to these sites and realize that no, I sold 10,000 copies. So the kind of money I'm due is this is the kind of money I'm due in terms of royalties, right? Why is this important? Because now it prevents the probability for publishing houses to do things like inflating numbers and inflating numbers or for their own benefits or watching down numbers, right? But then also it gives authors the power to be able to determine how necessarily they want to market their books, right? And determine what exactly is marketable to themselves, right? Or to the market, right? I think that those things are better than what you get from open opposition, right? But then, like on the whole idea of social movements and why we best answer that word from open opposition, right? So understand this, right? So books uniquely show individuals' genuine interest in a subject or topic, right? Why is this important or why is this true? Because there comes a certain kind of discipline that it takes to be able to complete a book, right? And the amount of interest it takes to complete a book in general, right? Why is this important? For social movements, right? Their main goal is to be able to propose a topic and like spark interest among people, right? The reason why our world solves this is because this kind of data that we are collecting, this kind of data that we are showing, allows publishers, and these social movements that have gone a long way to publish socially conscious books and whatnot, identify the specific areas that we're working on, specific areas that need to be able to identify, to be able to see that now books are failing in these areas. There's a need for us to be able to come up with strategies to be able to interrogate these guys and engage with these guys, right? Why is this better in our world? Because in our world, there's some sort of marginal benefits that you get on the side of social movements and socially conscious books, right? Because at best, right, we are going to be able to, at worst, right, these guys are not going to buy the books, but we're able to notice that these guys don't want to buy the books. We come up with ways and forms to be able to engage them. At best, we get them to buy the books. Think that those things are better on our side, right? But these things are things that you don't necessarily get from open opposition. Open opposition says, well, these problems exist. Don't show you how necessarily solve those problems. Think that their word is necessarily problematic, right? But then, another very important thing in today's debate, relax. Another very important thing in this bit is that the word necessarily is moving, right? So we're moving more from traditional copies to like digital copies and digital age, right? We think that there's a huge burden to be able to make sure that others are able to track these things, right? But then the problem is these things come with like things like data collection, data manipulation, data analysis that these authors are not equipped to do, right? Publishing houses necessarily are not equipped to do, right? So what BookScan and firms such as BookScan does is that they collect these data for these people. They give these people the ability to be able to still fit into the global age, right? Because like traditionally what is that you go around the bookshops and count the number of books that sold and whatnot, right? But in our world, you allow for them to have like, because in the digital front, it's very difficult for you to be able to like trace how many of your books sold on what website and whatnot, right? What this size do is that it allows you to be able to coagulate all those data, right? Why is this important? Because this data allows for these authors to be able to fit into the global, into the advancing global world and be able to market their books very well, right? But then also, publishing agencies that necessarily want to, publishing industries that agencies that necessarily want to restructure now have a form to be able to fit into like the global perspective, right? Because more of these guys like depend solely on things like marketing and whatnot. Before I move on, opening shoots. 3.
Do you realize that this last thing you said is a lie, given that there is the existence of ISBN, which allows for tracking of books all over the world? But secondly,
relax. Like, so, like, that's the thing about ISBN numbers, right? They still happen by they still happen by tracking like the bookshop, like down to the bookshops, which books sold in which bookshop, right? These are things that publishing agencies necessarily are not equipped to do, right? It's like they need like technology to be able to do this. You are proving how those things exist in your world. Once you didn't prove those things, don't think you can come in and say I'm lying, because I've proven to you how necessarily those things are, right? But then how world best achieve things like accountability measures within the scope, right? Because what happens necessarily within the publishing industry is like there's this vast disconnect, because publishing agencies like now have so much of overwhelming power, such that now authors now still always feel the need to be able to quote to what these publishing agencies say, right? Because publishing agencies are the ones that always have the data to be able to say, well, these are number of books that sell. This should necessarily fit your books into. Gives them so much power to be able to manipulate how authors necessarily come out to their works, right? Why I think our world is better? Because in our world now authors have access to the data, right? In our world, others have the ability to be able to determine what's necessarily selling and not necessarily listen to the kind of whims that publishing agencies put on them, right? I think our word gives artists so much power, right? But then what does our word also do in effect? Our word decentralizes the kind of information, right? I think that those things are very, very important. Artists need the information, publishers also need the information. Give it to everybody, up to all the symmetric.
We thank the member of government for that fine speech. Welcome the member of opposition to extend opposition's case.
All right, hello, please, am I audible?
Yes, you are audible.
Okay. Kindly give the speakers in order. Okay, I think I'm ready now. Let me set my timer. Okay, or please, Chair, if you have a timer, I don't know, can you please share it on the screen for me? Is it possible?
Okay, let me see if I can do that.
Okay, so okay, no problem.
All right, if you're ready, I'm ready.
Okay, then I'll be beginning in 3, 2, 1. This house supports BookScan. Panel note, we think that we have had quite a messy debate right from the runs along, right? I'm going to be doing a typical clear case clarification, and then we'll be having it to this debate. First of all, what I'm going to do to this debate is to analyze the capacity of BookScan, how supporting looks like. I'm also going to show you the nature of publishing companies, what this means for them, and then we are going to look at largely the impact into this debate, and finally we'll be ending that into this debate. So quickly, first of all, the capacity of BookScan. We understand that BookScan is able to provide sales history, and this is what supporters or publishers largely use as some form of credit rating in itself, right? The reason why I kept asking opening government to tell us what supporting looks like, you would understand into this debate. First of all, we think like supporting looks like one, relying on, in a majority of instances, on BookScan as a reference to judge the credibility of writers, right? Two, we think that supporting BookScan looks like relying on BookScan to predict the success of a new book. If that is not the case, why then would we want to rely on past successes, right? We think that we are relying on past successes to predict the probability of the success of a new book. We think that supporting BookScan also looks like relying on data from BookScan to pass credit rating judgments, when in fact, credit rating judgments are different from past successes in itself. If someone needs a clarity, please ask your POI, just barge in right now, else I'll not take you for clarity. 3, 2, 1. Okay, since there's now, it means it's clear. Now, first of all, we need to analyze the nature of publishing companies in today's debate, right? We think that publishing companies, we accept the characterization we get from opening government that these industries in themselves are profit-driven. It means that they are capitalistic. We think that is fine. This means that they operate with natural economic policies. We agree with all of that, right? But then we think that there is some form of a confirmation for profit making. It means that these guys would want to be sure that they can make profits from the book that is going to be sold, right? We agree with that characterization. We think that it's even backed by an economic principle that before you even commit resources to a business venture, you should be able to have enough evidence to back the kind of envisioned profits that you are looking at, right? What happens is that publishing industries look for indicators of public successes of books. We agree with that. But on the flip side of how publishing companies also work, we think that in some instances, they also require the writer to sell them their work and then they publish it on their own, on their behalf, and make money they want from it. Why is the analysis on what the support looks like is very important? First of all, we think that it creates a distinction between the objective of BookScan in principle and how publishers use it under the narrative of support. Because mind you, BookScan in itself is just an app or a particular service that shows you past successes of authors in themselves, right? We think that at supporting it is one that looks like this time around, publishers now rely on that to pass judgments on the possible success of a new book that is coming into the system. So supporting, analyzing the support allows us to create that distinction between the objective of BookScan in principle and how these publishers use it under the narrative of support. Two, we think that it also allows us to analyze to what extent supporting BookScan can disenfranchise the stakeholders that we are looking at in today's debate. So the concession we are making, the principle in which BookScan works is economical, we agree. It means that it rides on globally acceptable business metrics. What this means is that the problem does not exist in the nature of BookScan, but in how supporting it looks like in today's debate, right? How does a world without supporting BookScan look like? We think that on the side of publishers in our world, it means that they will have to revert to the use of credible literature review teams that were used before the rise of BookScan, right? These credible literature review teams were used to assess the quality of works brought before it on the standard of literature and not on the standard of past successes. What happens on the side of government is that publishers will now have to feed on some form of confirmation bias to accept that a book that they will publish would work or not, simply because some books they have passed in the past have worked. Mind you, we have already shown you how the capitalistic nature of these publishers makes it very likely for them to ignore other means of review that they can use for these works in question, especially after there's a natural influence of popularity. The impact on publishers is then, one, there is a higher risk of loss in OG's world and you get a lesser in our world. First of all, the fact that an author's presence or past books in the past has worked does not necessarily mean that a new book in itself would work. And that is what publishers gain wrong, right? Example, the book like Miranda and Mood by Imani that she wrote did very well. But the next book that was the movie version, that book did not do as well, even though she is a published author. We think that the fact that a book in itself has already worked before does not mean that another book would work in that particular regard, right? The benefit for them then is that in our world, publishers will now have to resort to more credible means of reviewing books rather than the popularity method. In that case, we save the publishers more money, or we save them from losing resources unnecessarily. On the part of artists, first of all, for popular artists, we think that it now forces these authors to maintain the quality standards of books because their popularity will no longer save them. The unintended effect that you get on the part of consumers is that now they are guaranteed of the quality that they pay for. For new artists, we think that they are not disenfranchised in any way. Yes, I'll take your POI, shoot quickly.
Panel, you must punish closing opposition for skewering the idea of BookScan. They don't want it to be done by numbers in retrospect, but then they want it to be done within the limits of literature. BookScan still exists in their own world.
Okay, you see, the problem with your world, which you don't get, is that before the existence of BookScan, publishers needed to resort to some form of agencies that use literature reviews and not consumer ratings that are that you get on normal internet services, right? It means then that before the existence of BookScan, what these authors did was to require you to bring your book. They give it to a team to study, and then they look at the likelihood that this book would work in the literature space. So we do not think we are skewing this debate in any way, because you already conceded when I asked that if you have clarity on the particular metric of what supporting looks like in itself. Now to continue, we think on the part of new authors, we are ensuring that they are not disenfranchised, right? The moral principle that happens behind that is that, first of all, you need to get that popular artists were once nobodies. It is therefore very immoral for them to write on that achieved status to marginalize new artists in that particular regard. And we think that with new artists as well, secondly, it provides them a standard that is literature-based alongside industry standards in that regard. On that note, we think we get a better impact in our world, right? The general impact of supporting or opposing BookScan is that now if we support BookScan, what we do is that we now relegate literature standard from industry standards. And we think that is where the problem lies in today's debate. Because then we need, as an industry, intrinsic in the principle of publishing industries, is to protect the integrity of literature that they procure or they produce out for the people themselves to consume, right? It then becomes too bad when these publishers decide to relegate these literature standards for their book by not reviewing the works in themselves, but relying on a naturally perceived influence of popularity to want to buy in to publish a book or not. We do not necessarily think that the case of government is one that runs in today's debate, because they say that, oh, it is capitalistic. For that reason, we need to get that in today's debate. We think that, first of all, even though ventures in themselves can be capitalistic, Chair, please, if it is time, I would appreciate that you just barge in and tell me. I can see the timer is not moving.
Your time is up. I thought you should know. All right, we thank the member of opposition for that fine speech. Welcome Government Whip to end government bench case. And please do look at the screen. Once the bell starts billing or ringing, it means your time is up. Thank you.
All right, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
All right, sure. All right, so I would like to take POI from opening opposition and also closing up if they have any. So starting my speech now. All right, so let's take CEO out. So panel note, the debate is not about using BookScan as a review mechanism, but it is a projection for consumerism and popularity. A book writer then can decide whether to subject their work to literature review. No one cares about whether you subject your work to literature review, because the award is a word that stands with a particular form of literature or a particular form of book. That is the classical literature that were written by Shakespeare, Tom Sawyer, etc. We think looking at the evolution and the digitization that Brain tells you about, it means that we need to kowtow and allow for that particular individuals to buy into the mainstream form of things. We think we don't need literature that contains hyperboles, similes, and verification of those things. We think that is very problematic. But then let's engage them on that particular regard. So they say that we need to show how our support looks like. But then again, if they are not supporting, it means they are opposing this. And how does their opposition also look like? So it looks like things like council culture, putting in enough resources to make sure that they crumble the business of BookScan, etc. It means that since they are capitalist, they are less likely to use those particular resources at their disposal that wouldn't even give them the kind of utility and the kind of benefits that they want. In a world where BookScan can be used as a very lucrative way for them to get enough resources, we think it's always justified to do that. Then we think the award again with the literature review case makes it create a form of an elitist form of literature, which even secludes other people. So we think closing opposition is not necessarily engaging the crust and the spirit of today's debate. That is why they are out in that particular regard. If you have clarity, let your quick give it that in that regard. But then again, what are the burdens of up to answer and prove? One, if they oppose BookScan, what other mechanism will be effective for the book publishers? No alternative from OO, but then from CO, they say literature review, and I've shown you how one that is elitist. Secondly, it doesn't give the kind of benefits these individuals want. Second burden that they are supposed to prove is how does the opposition benefit three major stakeholders in today's debate? That is one, the publishers, two, authors, and three, consumers. I'm going to give you analysis as to how our extension satisfy these three stakeholders in that particular regard. Opening opposition doesn't necessarily do that in today's debate. But panel, before that, let me rebut and engage opening opposition. So what do they say? They say, oh, it has their impact on authors. But then again, we've already proven to you how new authors will start with alternatives like Wattpad, and there's no proper checks, and popularity is also popularity is also a metric that exists. We understand that, see, when it comes to new creators or people with creative ideas, what necessarily happens is that they have a potential they have a potential to sell in that particular regard. It means in our world, what then happens is that there is a chance for them to be used by this particular publishing agencies, because at the end of the day, they base their things on the kind of popularity and the kind of nuances and what the market wants necessarily. It means that if upcoming artists won't be absorbed by these publishing agencies, there are alternatives that exist necessarily for them to do that. We think they can opt out whichever way that they want. Then they say, oh, it is going to enforce slavery in that particular regard. But panel notes that we do not force anyone to join publishing industry, because you have your choice to do that. That is why authors can decide two ways, either to be a freelancer or second, go to a publishing industry. In a world where we do not restrict you from you doing your freelancing work or using the other alternatives that exist, we think you have the mechanism to opt out in that particular regard. But then, why is someone typing rankings? But then again, what the debate is, they necessarily make the debate about minorities, and we think the reason why that is very problematic is because the award again do not solve the problem or answer the question why conservatives why would conservatives even read liberal workings in that particular regard. What you get from Brain is to tell you that when we use BookScan, what then means is that social movements who mostly write books, write articles in that particular regard, are able to understand the market, understand the taste of people, and make sure that they are able to kowtow to their interest and make sure they write to suit the line, and also convince these particular individuals who necessarily do not want that particular change in that particular regard. We think the award is something that is very problematic. But then how does CG's extension answers all question of exclusive benefits? One, it is justified to support a mechanism that cuts the cost and reduce capitalistic ventures from making risky investment. It means that one, in a free market system case that you get from OO is analyzed falsely because of things like one, in our world, there's things like economies of scale, and a lot of individuals have enough resources for them to do that in that particular regard. We think the award is a word that is mostly not dependent on the kind of choices and the kind of alternatives that we point out to you in that particular regard. We think our award is a word that does that in that particular regard. Then they say, oh, it limits artistic creativity of the authors and their freedom. We've already shown you how there's a choice and there's a kind of opt-out that exists. But then again, people again go into writing because of their passion. So for example, if these publishing industries are oppressive because of their passion, they have the incentive to freelance in that particular regard. We think the award is something that we necessarily do not buy into. But what are the extensions that you get from Brain? Brain tells you one, the incentive mechanization for authors. That is one, tracking access to information to claim the kind of royalties that they deserve. This is very important because of its extension on the decentralization of information that Brain totally analyzed to you. It means that the kind of information that these people have are able to give them the moral and the incentive to claim for what they necessarily deserve. We solve the problem of publishing industries oppressing and cutting down the kind of cost and the kind of royalties that these authors necessarily deserve. Then on social movements, it tells you that BookScan will then help us to have information and marketing strategy to even engage individuals on the extreme. So whichever strategy that is going to help us to enhance that particular societal discourse, we think is very important. But what brings us to today's debate is the kind of evolution going on in the book writing industry, and nothing engages on that. Brain tells you that we are able to fit into the global space because there's an active migration to using things like ebooks and audiobooks. What BookScan then do is that we know the taste of the consumers and which form of that we need to do. We think our word is a word that allows these people to remain relevant in the book writing industry, especially for this publishing corporation. Proud to propose.
Thank the government whip for that speech. And we welcome the opposition whip to end this debate.
All right, people. Please, am I audible?
Yes, you are audible.
Okay, so thank you very much. So I'm Alexandra. preferred pronoun, she, her. You can refer to my my partner and myself as they, them, they are, whatever. So for POIs, I'd prefer that you unmute after my 4th minute, right? So, but you please do that gently and please don't badger. So if I take, fine. If I don't, after a minute, you can come up again with a POI. So assuming that I'm still audible, I'm going to begin my speech. If Chair could just confirm that, so I go on.
Yes, you are still audible.
Okay, thank you very much. So panel, notice how CG loses out on what literature review looks like, right? Because what Jonathan tells you in today's debate, right, which is why they are totally out of this debate, right? They lose out on what literature review looks like, right? Because they say that it looks like the examining of books to see where, etc. Right? Panel, this is like a feeble stand to take and a feeble example to give, right? Notice how industry standard literature review looks like assessing books on the level of 1, literature, the literature quality, 2, the educational value, 3, the language, and 4, consumerism. I think that things like hyperbole and etc. that CG says is only one tiny section of what the industry like standard literature review looks like, right? i.e. literature quality. On that note, they lose out on all the attacks on our frame and all those things, right? But then panel, before we engage CG very clearly, we think that we'll move to their opinion, right? We think we concede with the kind of framing and characterization that we get from opening government, right? And we credit Jonathan for doing a good characterization in today's debate because there was a lot of things that we should have understood in today's debate before running it, right? But we think that we'll still engage them with some of these issues that they failed to clarify. We think that the problem that we have with opening government was on the issue of, we think that because these things are verified, like these statistics that we give or this data that we give, they are verified, and so there are things that are trustworthy and we can necessarily trust, right? We think that panel, till now, from beginning of the debate till now, we all concede the fact that falsifications will still exist, right? With or without these verifications, because whatsoever, it means that there will still be an influence, like there's still going to be an influence, right? But panel, we think that the problem with our opinion, right, is that they say that at a point where one industry decided to neglect and alter because of bad past experiences, they can go to another one, right? But then notice how, first of all, they already say that publishers are capitalists in nature, right? This means it is less likely for them to get any other publisher in the first place, right? But then even if there's a slight possibility for this will happen, we think that, like we now kind of disenfranchise authors and limits the scope of chances available to them, right? A world that disenfranchises the authors is a world that it's bad and a world that we will never buy into in today's debate, right? But panel, notice how one thing again that we need to like attack from what we get from DPM speeches, right? Is on the issue of, there doesn't necessarily, he makes a slight analysis, or he makes something analysis that we should necessarily not engage in, have like support in today's debate, right? What they say is that even in the debate space there exist feedback forms where you can necessarily fill feedback on judges and speakers, and due to that rating they will be rated and whatever, know who to break and who not to break, right? Notice how panel things like this can work in the debate space, but then when it comes to the literature space, it doesn't necessarily fit in, right? Notice how our opening shows you clearly how necessarily when you do this, you go against the up and coming writers, right? The new writers that are also now coming up, right? But we think that we should do a little more by looking at the history of writers in and of themselves, right? Jonathan shows you clearly how most times, even at the beginning of these writers, like lifestyle of these writers, right? They face like problems like one, like lack of fans, two, like the lack of role models to necessarily channel them to the right field that they should necessarily, go, right? So that you have writers writing in like different fields, writers that write on rom-com, writers that write on love, write on fiction, write on marriage books and all those things, right? But then in the beginning of these, of the lives of these writers, dilemma of which for them, right? It means that before. Who's badgering? Please, can my timer be paused? Hello, can I be heard?
time.
Hello.
Opposition with please post the time. Opposition with please post. I just want to confirm. I discovered that yes, your timer has been paused. It's the chair. I just said I want to just confirm. Hold on, confirm. Beatrice is still here. Your panelists just want to confirm if the person is back. Hello. Please, judges that are available. Gideon, you are here. Opeyemi is here. I can see Judge Beatrice here. I can see Judge Ryosei Kobayashi is here and myself. I don't know. The last panel that left, have you joined? Just want to confirm to be sure.
Yeah.
Okay, you have joined. All right. So sorry, you can continue your speech, opposition. We just wanted to confirm the judges that left the call so that we know those that stayed throughout the speech. So you may begin.
Okay. Sure, that's fine. But then, Chair, I'll be glad if you can tell me where exactly you lost me, because you were lagging at a point.
You were talking about the point you started breaking was when you were giving analysis that, look, these authors don't have money, and the fact that your word is going to make them not to spend those money that they don't have. They don't need to undergo those pressures and all of those things. That is the point.
Yeah.
Where they're cutting off for me. Thank you. Sure.
Thank you very much, Chair. So then you get from our opening how this is quite unfair to like the up and coming writers and all those things, right? But then we think that even beyond it being unfair to them now, we think that even if we take a historic look at what happens in the lives of writers, right? I've shown you how writers write in different fields, right? So we have writers that write in rom-com, others that are good at fiction, others that are good at social movements, like social advocacies and all those things, right? We think that before these writers will be actualized to confirm that they are good when it comes to writing about social advocacy, they would have written about love, written about marriage and all those relationships and all those things, and they wouldn't have worked, right? So now that they've found the field that works for them, and they are like focused on this particular one, and they bring a piece of work, and you say that you're necessarily going to look at the previous works that they have brought, i.e. the ones that they wrote on love that didn't work and all those things, it means that you're being quite unfair to them, right? Which is why we think that the world of OG doesn't really it's not necessarily unfair to both to these authors, right? But then get clearly what Jonathan shows you, right? So time is already spent, right? You didn't take POI, so I don't see, right? Please just relax. All right. So then you get from our closing government on how there necessarily exist ISBNs that necessarily give the ability to trace their publishers and all those things, right? We think that kudos, it is a good thing to have, right? But we think that in such policies, before such policies are brought out, right, we need to necessarily analyze the impact on not just the publishers, but the impact on authors and impact on consumers, which is exactly what you get from Jonathan in his members' speech, right? What does it tell you? It tells how one on the side of publishers, it means that they will revert to the use of credible literature review teams to assess the quality of the work brought before them, right? These credible quality means is what I have already analyzed to you in the beginning of my speech, right? What then happens on the side of government work, right, is that publishers feed, these publishers are going to feed on some form of confirmation bias to expect, to kind of, in order for them to accept the publisher, or in order for them to accept to publish a book or whatsoever, right? But then mind you, Pana, what we have to do is that we have already shown you how the capitalistic nature, as we've already considered from opening government, the capitalistic nature of this book makes it very likely for them to ignore the previous previous successes and previous losses means, or the means of the previous means of review the work in question, especially after there was a national there's a way of being popular, right? But then the impact again on the publisher will show you already, panel, that there is a higher risk of loss in OG's work, because first of all, the fact that an author sort of brings a book in the past does not necessarily mean that it makes the same mistakes and all those things. I've already analyzed you how historically how they go through a lot of things before they finally actualize or settle in a particular field, right? Jonathan has already done a better job, right? Now, on the part of authors too, we show you how we have popular authors and we have the upcoming or the new authors, right? Reasons why from CO, we save everybody, we save both the popular, we give traction to both the popular authors, traction to both also the new authors and also the consumers, right? Because we show you that on the part of the popular authors, we focus, like, it kind of makes the authors to maintain or maintain the quality standard of books, or because of the kind of popularity or traction they've already gained in society, and they cannot necessarily scare them, right? Because and it even has an unintended harm, right, or an unintended benefit or impact on the part of consumers, because at the end of the day, they are able to generate a form of like books or whatever that they pay for. They are necessarily not disenfranchised, right? Because on moral principle, Jonathan has shown you how popular authors use like they were also once new writers, right? They were also once nobodies, which means that it is therefore immoral for them never been this proud to oppose.
Opposition with time. All right. We thank the opposition for ending the debate for us, and congratulations to all the teams that made it to the semi-finals. For my panelists, we'll be using